I lost $500,000 by the time I was 25 years old. This is a story that maybe some of you have gone through. This is a story that entrepreneurs, people trying to talk about how to earn money on the internet, have not told, but yet a lot have experienced. Now, I'm almost 30, so I wanted to take the time to reflect on these catastrophic moments in my life, but also talk about the story of what it took to get there in the first place. Because a lot of people lose money, but a lot of people don't have what it takes to make money. Now let's step back in time. 2019, I was a year or so out of graduating from college. I had an illustrious time on Wall Street. I had worked in tech, and I knew that the corporate world just was not for me. It wasn't working. Though I had been very successful in my roles, I had exceeded my sales quota by X in both of my short-term roles. Something didn't feel right. I knew it from my very first internship. And my very first internship was at one of the most premier tech companies in Silicon Valley. Free food, transportation, great pay, great office, great people. San Francisco. Sounds amazing. I hated it. Every single minute of it. I worked normal hours, was dead tired every day, and I had no motivation to do what I was asked to do. So obviously after college, I have to get a job, start paying back some of the student loan debt that I had. And this is what you do. You get a job, you use your degree, which I didn't actually, but I went out there and hustled. And I knew from a very early age that I was interested in money, not just making it, but how it worked. Although I didn't have a degree in finance, I was able to work my way into one of the top Wall Street companies you've heard of. There's only about 4 big ones, and I was in one of them. I managed to weasel my way in. At the same time, I became an avid trader and investor in the stock market. Remember, I said I had a fascination with money. I had a fascination with people seemingly being able to print it out of thin air. Well, now we know they actually do, but at the time, it was much more opaque for me. I saw movies of Wall Street traders yelling and screaming at each other, which might as well have been Chinese. And I wanted every piece of that. So I took it into my own hands sometime in college and learned how to invest in stocks. The very first app, I don't even think it exists anymore, allowed me to buy fractional shares in only a select few apps like Apple, Tesla, Nike. And I did. And if I probably would have held to some of those stocks, I would have had multiple six figures with just a few $100s. So let's get back to 2019. I had a pretty good run investing. I actually quit my job at this Wall Street company. I was unhappy, of course, as we can tell. I quit my job because a company which I was holding for a very long time, I had a lot of conviction in, got bought out. I was basically all in on this company. Not something I'd recommend you to do, but I had a pretty decent sized portfolio. And for what the time was a small 50 to 100K, seemed like a lot of money. And in my life, I had never seen that much money before in any bank account, anything, anywhere, except in a movie. So for the first time, I had a little pot of cash to figure out what I wanted from life. I tried everything, invested in real estate, started a cannabis business during the cannabis boom. I started an e-com business. I went to China to grow that e-com business. Did it all. I also continued to trade stocks. Did a little crypto here and there. Now, 2020 comes around. This is the height of the bull market. I'd like to say I was a genius. I had used some of my money, lost some on different ventures, made some cash flow just to live, but I still had my portfolio that I was trading, and I had ran up this portfolio to about, again, $50,000, trading options around stocks like Tesla and Apple. At the time, Tesla was a super volatile stock, very easy to trade, and also very easy to make money on. So was I a genius? No. Did I pick the right asset that I knew I could stick with and make money? Yes, and it worked. At the time I had this e-com business, I paid a visit to China to talk to manufacturers, and I made friends with some of the locals there. An actual funny story, I met this guy, his name is MFAT because he used to be fat, but he was actually a tall, slender Chinese man, maybe 23, 24 at the time of me meeting him. When I went to the manufacturers fair, this is called the Canton Fair. It's the biggest fair in the world for manufacturing. It's the size and scale of it is just so impressive and unbelievable. You have to see it. I'm talking Dallas Cowboy Stadium size, but there's 5 of them in a row just for clothes. Back to the story, meeting my friend. I decided to go outside, get some air. There was a basketball court. A friend of mine told me a funny story when he was in China. He was tall, African American. I'm of mixed complexion, and Stephen Curry at the time was very popular. So he told me this story. My friend told me this story how when he went to China, he's about a 6'2" African American guy that people were handing him babies. Now I'm mixed. And at the time I had shorter hair. People used to call me Steph Curry. 2016, 2018, Steph Curry was all the rave, the GOAT. So I went onto a basketball court and I started shooting the ball because I wanted to test this theory. The guy I met, along with several others, started recording me playing basketball. This was hilarious. I have the video somewhere. I'll see if I can find it. Anyways, this guy, this MFAT, he comes up to me and he asks me, "You play basketball?" I said no. And he goes, "Oh, I knew that because you're too short." I might be 6 foot with some shoes on. Anyways, we converse. We talk about what it's like living in China. I tell him why I'm there. He's actually a student helping work the fair, and we become friends. I download the app. The only way to communicate with people really in China is through this app called WeChat, and you have to know someone Chinese in China to get access to this app. Fast forward a couple months later. Now, mind you, we went to this fair November 2019. January 2020. The stock market is at all-time highs. Again, my portfolio, all-time highs. Something is going on. My friend, I start seeing these videos on the internet, maybe on Twitter and Telegram, of people just collapsing in China. Stories about entire apartment blockades being blocked off. I asked my friend MFAT, what's going on? And he tells me he's locked up in his apartment building. So I'm hearing about this virus, and I'm thinking to myself, nobody sees this coming. Nobody. For some reason, I thought I did. I got my family to get some masks. My father worked in a factory, so he had access to the N95 mask, and we were prepared as well as we could have been. Come February, starts to sprinkle into the news that COVID is coming, and we shouldn't really have to worry about it. Wash your hands. The next thing I did is I figured this is going to be really bad. So I positioned myself accordingly in my stock portfolio. I put all my assets against the market. I bought long dated puts, which is shorting the market, betting against the market in leverage, long dated put contracts on the S&P 500 all the way out to June. It was basically a price that said the stock market could drop 50%, you might make some money. The price of these contracts were so cheap that the likelihood of this happening was really not priced in yet. I also bought puts on airliners, Delta, American, United, and cruise liners, Norwegian, Carnival, Royal, Caribbean. Bought some volatility index calls, so I was all in. It was make or break, do or die. Come about 2 weeks later, I put these positions on sometime in late February. The world shuts down. The world closes. So I was right. And though I was right, it really didn't feel that great. I remember I took a walk and thinking to myself, a lot of people are going to die from this. After the world closes, the stock market opens. Every day for a week, it crashes, limit down. And what a limit down is, the stock market has these protections where if there is a drop of more than, I believe, 7%, the stock market will pause. Then after a certain amount, it'll just close. Every single day for a week, it was a bloodbath. I sat there in my 2-bedroom apartment, which we shared with 4 people, myself, my girlfriend at the time, my friend, his girlfriend at the time, my girlfriend is now my fiance. She's rode through all of this with me. Every single day, I watched my portfolio go from 45K to 70K. Good job. 120K. Wow. 200K. 250K. 350K. And I believe I saw my portfolio peak at around 475K before I sold some of it and exited positions. So I had exited somewhere around 350K, and I was the king of the world. I was the smartest person I knew. Nobody got this right. Maybe me and Bill Ackman, who famously went on the news to scare the market, to only come to find out that he not only shorted the market before, but he bought the bottom. Probably made the bottom. The story doesn't stop there. So I'm on top of the world. 24, 25 years old. I made $500,000 in a week. Nobody I knew did this. Everyone else I knew lost money. So a week goes by. I start thinking, could I buy a car? I really just buy a car. Could I buy a car? Aston Martin Vantage at the time. Stupid. So I had all this money. I withdrew some of it to a bank account. Because I was a genius, I figured I can do this again. But this time, if I could go from 45K to 400, what would it be like to go from 400K to 5 million? The next thing I did is I tried to decide what was going to happen to the markets. Did a lot of research, looked at different macro analysis, different talking heads. Of course, everyone figured the end of the world was here. We didn't know what to do. We got hit with the virus, whom some people knew about, but we were very ill prepared for. We didn't know when the doors were going to open again. We didn't know when the streets were going to be filled again. We didn't know when airport traffic was coming back. We didn't know when people stuck in cruise liners in the middle of the ocean were going to be allowed back onto land. So a couple weeks later, I already had made my decision. I knew what I was going to do. I was going to, again, short the stock market. But this time I was going to bet against the companies directly. I believe that they were going to fail. I specifically bet against 3 assets: LQD, JNK, HYG. These are all corporate debt indexes. Some of them, like LQD, represent high-grade debt, Apple's debt, some of the greatest in the world. They're going to make money, so they're going to pay it back. JNK, HYG, these were essentially high-yielding debt instruments that we didn't know if these companies were going to exist. I believe some of them might have had like Hertz basketed in there. At the time, Hertz was doing very bad. So, again, shorted the market. Again, bought puts against the S&P 500. There was one thing that I had never experienced in my short life. Maybe those in 2008 who are working professionals had, but this was a totally different story. The Federal Reserve and a great man by the name Jerome Powell. The Federal Reserve came out with an article. It was a Sunday. The Federal Reserve taps BlackRock and other entities to do direct asset purchases of instruments like HYG, JNK, and several others, right? But the ones that I bought, that I bet against, were included in that. So come Monday morning, my portfolio goes from 350K to 200K. I didn't think that was possible. The volatility got wiped out of the assets that I had purchased because, well, there was no risk left in them. The Federal Reserve was going to directly inject liquidity so that they could backstop these assets. They were printing infinite money from thin air. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it so much that for the next 2-3 months, I couldn't do anything. I was frozen. I watched my portfolio drown. I could have exited with $90,000. Would have had that, could have put it in a savings account, could have lived off of it. But no, I needed to find a way to make it back. This is a phenomenon that happens with gamblers, and I had to learn this myself later on. I was gambling. Now, did I do the right thing and position accordingly for a risk that in my head I could quantify? Yes. And I positioned myself with the amount of money that did mean something to me. But then when you make that much money, there was something that I didn't understand. I didn't have to go back into that position with all of it. I risked all of my upside. I put it back into the casino. There's one thing I didn't understand was as you make more money, your position size matters almost more than the positions themselves because you have to protect your downside risk. A 50% drop from K is 25K, but a 50% drop from 4K, you're down $250,000, my friend. And in my brain, because I had never seen that much money before in my life, I couldn't process that. And quite honestly, it took me at least 6 months to really recover from that moment. Now, this won't be the last time I lost money on something. I've been in crypto for the last 6-7 years. I've built several businesses. I've probably made that back and then some. I've also given some back in different investments and different trades. But I've built sustainable businesses across media, marketing. I've learned a valuable lesson that size matters. I've learned how to manage my risk better. This was only 5 years ago. It wasn't that long. Now, this page is going to be about money. So like and subscribe. This page is going to be about how money works, about the flows, the economics, the stories you don't know about how people made and lost their fortunes. Thank you for watching if you made it this far. And if you've had an experience similar to this, feel free to reach out.